Hello,
Hello,
friend.
friends.
At the
At the
outset, I
outset, I
thank
thank MOI office bearers for giving me this opportunity. So, my talk for the day is clinical examination of the shoulder. If you consider shoulder joint, it is one of the most complex joints as far as clinical examination is concerned. More often than not, the diagnosis is clinched by getting a specialized investigation like MRI done. Although a structured clinical examination will clinch at least the broad category of the disease suffering from, but the key word is structured clinical examination. Not to overemphasize, but in any clinical examination, the most important part is history taking. And few points from the history would probably lead you to a better diagnostic or a better diagnosis. First and foremost is the age of the patient. It is a very important parameter as it probably tells you regarding the pathology the patient is suffering from. We can grossly divide the patients into two groups. One, below the age of 40 years, and second, above the age of 40 years. If you consider patients above the age of 40 years, the pathologies which come to your mind are probably rotator cuff disease or a cuff tear, subacromial impingement, acromioclavicular joint arthritis, subcoracoid impingement, bicipital tendinitis, and adhesive capsulitis. At the same time, if the patient who is presenting to you is less than 40 years of age, what comes to our mind is probably instability, which could be antero-inferior glenohumeral instability, glenoidal labral tears, which could be anterior or posterior labral tears, it could be a flap lesion, the lesions of the long hair of biceps, supraspinatus tendinosis, and acute calcific tendinitis. So just by dividing patients into two groups, you have probably thought of one of the pathologies which probably the patient is suffering from. The second important point in the history is pain. We have to understand and know what is the grade of pain on a VAS scale. Plus, sometimes you have to ask leading questions as to whether the pain worsens at night, whether it radiates from the neck, and what are probable difficulties in doing activities of daily living. For example, if the patient's pain worsens at night, then a probable condition the patient is suffering from could be a cuff disease or adhesive capsulitis. If the patient has got radiation, it could be due to a cervical disc disease. Loss of abduction will suggest a cuff tear, and a global painful movement would suggest adhesive capsulitis, which could be either due to a diabetes or could be a secondary adhesive capsulitis due to rotator cuff disease. The third point in the history is to ask about limitation of range of motion. Pattern of movement restriction will probably guide us or guide the clinician to a diagnosis. When it comes to basic assessment of the shoulder, as we all know, the shoulder is assessed or any joint is assessed as to see, to feel, and to move, and then do some specialized tests. So when it comes to basic assessment, the first point is inspection, that is to see. One must clear the cervical spine before touching the shoulder. The basics of assessment are uncover the patient. The patient's back and the shoulder should be free from clothes. Examine for any wasting, scars, sinuses, or prominences around the shoulder. See for active range of motion. See for passive range of motion. Then do a resisted isometric testing of the individual muscle groups and also look for proprioception. In inspection, as we said, we have to see for the shoulder contours, whether both the shoulders are level or not. There is a marked internal rotation of the shoulders, which one can see in professional swimmers. Whether there is any prominence of SC or AC joints, wasting of the supraspinatus or infraspinatus, old surgical scars and sinuses, and more importantly, the scapulothoracic rhythm. So in active ROM, one needs to assess following movements, which are elevation through abduction, which is about 170 to 180 degrees in normal patients, elevation through forward flexion, which is again 160 to 180 degrees, extension, which is 50 to 60 degrees, external rotation, which is 80 to 90 degrees, and internal rotation, which is done by thumb hitch method, one should be able to reach about dorsal 6 to 10 vertebra to say that it's a normal. Adduction is around 50 to 75 degrees. Along with this, horizontal adduction, protraction and retraction, along with elevation and depression of the shoulder should also be assessed for. Active ROM is always done in standing position. To give you an example, this is active ROM, which is the first video which you see is forward elevation flexion, which is 160 to 180 degrees. Whereas if you see extension, it is about 60 degrees. One needs to understand that this situation, one should see that the torso remains erect. A forward elevation can be compensated by excessive lordosis at the lumbar spine. At the same time, the extension can be compensated forward flexion. So one has to always see that the trunk is erect whenever you are seeing this active range of motion when it comes to forward flexion and extension. This is abduction and adduction. In abduction, when you see, the palms are facing in front and the patient moves both the hands together in a synchronous way to reach the ear lobules. The normal range of abduction is 170 to 180 degrees. This is how one tests adduction. The patient is stable and the patient is asked to move his hand across his body to test for the adduction. External and internal rotation, where you see that the external rotation is about 80 to 90 degrees. Here the patient stands with the elbows hitched into the sides, and so that the elbows, they do not move, and gently the patient has to move the elevation. The normal external rotation is about 80 to 90 degrees. The external and internal rotation can also be tested in supine position, and we will come to that in next part of the presentation. When you come to the internal rotation in standing position, it is done by thumb hitching method, and you can see the scapular spine there correlates with the D7 vertebra, and the thumbs are reaching well above D7, which indicates that the patient has got a normal internal rotation, and it is identical on both the sides. Now we come to what is called as passive range of motion. What we have to see is when you see patient perform active range of motion, you have to do passive range of motion yourself. And in this situation, we have to see that the joint is moving through the glenohumeral joint, because in all the movements of the shoulder joint, it is not only the glenohumeral joint, but it is also the scapulothoracic movement, and which is also aided by movements of the acromoclavicular and sternoclavicular joints. So we have to isolate the glenohumeral joint in order to know what is the exact range of glenohumeral flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, horizontal adduction, horizontal abduction, external rotation, and internal rotation. So whenever you are doing a passive ROM, most of these tests are performed in sitting position except for rotation. Flexion, when it comes to flexion, you can see that one hand of the examiner is placed on the clavicle anteriorly and onto the scapula posteriorly. When you do that, what you're trying to do is trying to avoid the scapulothoracic movement. And in this situation, if you release this hand, the hand can further be elevated to the full range, that is 180 degrees. So the flexion and glenohumeral joint is 90 degrees, and combined flexion is about 180 degrees. When it comes to extension, in the similar way, the clavicle and the scapula is stabilized, and the hand is moved behind to see for active extension, which in normal patient should be about 60 degrees. In abduction, the glenohumeral movement is 90 degrees, and the combined abduction is 180 degrees. Please pardon me for the mistake. I have written 18 degrees there, whereas adduction is glenohumeral 20 degrees and combined 40 degrees. So when you're doing the abduction, here again the hand stabilizes the scapula and the clavicle. And here, once you release the hand, there occurs the external rotation along with the abduction, range of abduction, which is 180 degrees. So the combined movement is 180 degrees. Similar to abduction, in adduction, one has to stabilize the inferior angle of the scapula. As you saw here, this inferior angle of the scapula stabilized, the adduction is just sooner you leave the hand, you can further adduct it to another 20 degrees, giving rise to a 40 degrees of combined adduction. Recent gadgets have given us a little more of insight, and we can use smartphones to measure the shoulder joint movement. And with smartphone movements, there has been high inter-rater reliability of about 0.89%. By using smartphone, one can have a calculated external rotation and internal rotation. So if we go into the measures and go into the measures app, you will find that you will have a level there, and you can know the internal rotation and external rotation at the shoulder joint. Whenever you are testing this, again, you are going to stabilize the coracoid process, the video of which will come in the next slide. So here when you see that the internal rotation is 83 degrees and external rotation is also 83 degrees. This means that the patient has got a TROM, which is a total ROM, which is sum of external rotation and internal rotation. Normally, it should be 135 to 180 degrees. In this patient, it comes to about 160 degrees odd, which suggests that the patient has got a normal range of TROM, that is total range of motion. The importance of this here is this TROM, if there is a side-to-side difference of more than 10 degrees, then it is said that it is of significance, clinical significance, or it is abnormal. Only internal rotation deficit of 10 degrees as compared to the opposite side does not really clinically signify abnormal shoulder pathology. So that is the way how it is done in supine position. You stabilize the coracoid process and then perform external rotation to achieve the true external rotation occurring at the glenohumeral joint. This is another test which will probably tell you about the functional status of the shoulder, which talks about almost all the movements occurring at the shoulder joint along with the scapulothoracic and the AC and ST joints. And Aplay's scratch test would give you a functional assessment of the shoulder. Here the patient moves hands in this fashion to touch both the fingers to each other. And in this situation, it is often seen that on the dominant side, the range of motion is less as compared to the non-dominant side, although that does not signify any disease, but a smoothness of this movement which is done by the patient would probably suggest a good shoulder dynamics and a good shoulder functional control. The scapulothoracic rhythm is the next which one needs to see for, and it is by far one of the most important things to see. As we have been talking, when you see in abduction, what happens here is it's not only glenohumeral movement, it is the scapula moving, it is the AC moving, it is the SC moving, and when you see that when it crosses beyond 90 degrees, where you see that the shoulder moves into external rotation. So scapulothoracic movement, one can see again, this is very, very important to see that whenever the shoulder is moving in full abduction, the glenohumeral joint always rotates, and there is an external rotation of 45 degrees which takes place to achieve full abduction. When you see it on the live patient, you will be able to see that this abduction occurs through the glenohumeral joint as well as the scapulothoracic joint, and you can see both the scapulae moving identically on both the sides. When this is happening, you can say that your shoulder kinematics are in perfect shape. If one scapula is not moving to the extent it should, that indicates that there is an altered scapulothoracic rhythm, and this is the first thing which one would like to get back whenever you are doing a shoulder rehab. When it comes to individual muscle testing, we call them as special tests. So we test for individual muscles to see for any shoulder pathology. And here we see that there is an evidence for each and every test which talks about the efficacy or the sensitivity and specificity of this test. So the first test is what is called as MTCAN or Jobs test, which is done for supraspinatus, and it is about 88% sensitive and 62% specific for supraspinatus. This test is done in standing position where the shoulder is elevated and then the patient is asked to internally rotate with the thumbs down and is asked to actively abduct against the resistance. If the muscle is weak or if it is weaker as compared to the opposite side or the patient complains of pain, we say that MTCAN test is positive. The second test is full CAN test. The full CAN test is again done for supraspinatus. The sensitivity is 70% and specificity is 81%. The test is performed in the same fashion except for now the thumbs are facing up and the patient is asked to abduct against the resistance. Here also weakness as compared to the opposite side or pain will suggest that there is a supraspinatus pathology, which could be positive in supratendinosis. It could be positive in supra tear. External rotation test or external rotation lag test is of questionable clinical importance, and it is done for both supra as well as infra. When in sitting position, stabilizing the scapula, the hand is held into external rotation position, and the patient is asked to hold that position for a while. If the patient hand falls forward and is not able to hold this position, this suggests supra as well as infra insufficiency or rotator cuff tear. Lift-off test is done for subscapularis and the sensitivity is of 22% with a 94% of specificity. In standing position, the patient's hand is put at the back and patient is asked to lift off the examiner's hand out of his own body. Weakness here or inability to do this or pain during this maneuver suggests that the test is positive and talks about the subscap tear. There are certain other tests which can be done for rotator cuff, which are external rotation lag sign, a bear hug test for subscapularis, belly press test again for subscapularis. This is especially true when the patient cannot do abduction and external rotation or internal rotation as in adhesive capsulitis. I think belly press test would be the test which one would do for subscap rather than doing a lift-off test. And there is a hornblower sign which is specifically positive for teres minor and infraspinatus. Then we come to some tests for impingement. So subacromial impingement is a common ailment which we see in elderly patients, and Hawkins-Kennedy test for subacromial impingement is 80% sensitive and 56% specific. While doing this test, the patient sits on a couch, the examiner's hand goes onto the shoulder, and then with the other hand, the examiner internally rotates the shoulder. This maneuver pushes a greater tuberosity below the acromion, and if the patient has got bony or soft tissue impingement, the patient will complain of pain. And it is called as positive Hawkins sign, which will talk of subacromial impingement. Some other tests for subacromial impingement are Yoakum's test, Neal's test, Job's test, and a painful arc. We have not included all the tests as examination of the shoulder joint in itself is not a very valid kind of examination as we have seen in sensitivity and specificity of different tests. When you come to instability of shoulder dislocations or recurrent dislocations, apprehension test is one of the most important tests and has got a strong clinical value with a specificity of 95.4%. This is done in a lying down position, and we will come to that later as we see a second test for shoulder instability called as relocation test has got a moderate clinical value and a specificity of about 90.2%. These two tests we will see as how they are performed. The patient is lying in supine position. The scapula is stabilized with the pressure on the coracoid. And the moment you do this, the patient has got apprehension on the face. So you have to see for apprehension on the face, or patient sometimes might tell you that the doc, it's hurting me, So please stop there. Sometimes you can even feel a pop, and if you feel this pop and you support the anterior shoulder with a thumb or a palm, you get a feel of relocation of a dislocated humeral head by doing this maneuver, and it's called as relocation test. Both these tests are done in supine position. Other tests for shoulder instability are release of surprise test, load shift test, Kim's test for posterior instability, and jerk test again for posterior instability. There is another common lesion which we come across in athletes, and that is a flap lesion. O'Brien's test is of weak clinical value with a specificity of just 36%. Although the O'Brien test is done in a standing position where the hand is forward flexed to 90 degrees, is adducted 10 degrees and internally rotated, and the patient is asked to push against the resistance. Here the pain or the click felt in the shoulder suggests that it's a positive clinical sign, and that would probably suggest that the patient has got a flap tear. Other tests for labral tears are Yergason test, Speed's test, passive distraction test, and a Cran test. AC joint pathologies are again common as the patient passes the middle age. And in this, the cross-body adduction test gives us a weak clinical value with 26% of specificity and 64% of sensitivity. It's done in standing position where the hand is elevated to 90 degrees of flexion, elbow is completely extended, and a cross-body adduction is performed. If the patient complains of pain at the site of acromion, we probably say that the patient has got an AC joint pathology. A second test is called a scarf test, wherein the patient puts his hand onto the opposite shoulder. It is elevated to 90 degrees and the neck is pushed across the body. If the patient talks of pain at the acromioclavicular side region, it talks about AC joint pathology. So we have seen almost all common elements which a clinician can face or a general orthopedic surgeon can face in his clinic. And depending upon the history, presentation of pain, the time of pain, the restriction of the pattern or the movement of the shoulder joint, and by doing certain specific maneuvers, one can reasonably reach to a workable diagnosis. So to conclude, I would always like to say that before you start with your shoulder examination, never underestimate cervical spine. Always do clear the cervical spine before you see the shoulder. Examine the patient in all three positions, that is standing, sitting, and lying down. Make arrangements of sufficient privacy to examine the patient with the clothes off. Never see them with the clothes on. You will miss on very, very important information. Move, feel, and special test in a structured way is the way to go ahead. Never forget to see a scapulothoracic rhythm. And a good clinical examination, I must say, should not take you more than 7 minutes if you really follow a structured pattern of shoulder examination. Thank you for your attention.
Hello friends, welcome to the MOA Master Series, and today I'm going to discuss upon the mini open rotator cuff repair. So this is the place where I work, KM Hospital, Mumbai, and that is where I trained and got the technique. My boss, Dr. James Shaw, who has taught me this technique during my fellowship. So the ability to perform a technique is not an indication to perform it on the patient. So this sentence is very important. Just because we are able to perform a procedure, let's say arthroscopically or for other means, it's not an indication that we need to do it on the same. So when we choose one technique over the other, the one with the better result should always be chosen. However, if both the techniques or many techniques give the same result, then a simple and cost-effective method should be used than a complicated or a costly procedure. So proposed advantages of arthroscopy while doing rotator cuff repair are: number one, better outcome, less post-operative pain, less stiffness, and maybe it's cost-effective. That's what is being proposed. However, is it really the case? Let's see. So I'm going to run through a few meta-analysis and few randomized control trial, and let's see how do these two procedures fares against each other. So when you see outcomes, this systematic review and meta-analysis say that both mini open and and arthroscopic rotator cuff repair give similar result and can be used interchangeably based on the patient and rotator cuff tear characteristics. Another article which compares all arthroscopic versus mini open, again they say there is no difference. One more article by Morse says arthroscopic versus mini open rotator cuff, there is no difference in outcome between the arthroscopic and mini open rotator cuff technique. More and more articles. Another article in 2013 Arthroscopy Journal that clinical outcome in all arthroscopic versus mini open, they do not significantly differ between the patients. Another article was by Zhang in European Journal of Orthopedic Surgery and Traumatology. At 24 years follow-up, the functional results are significantly better in both groups, but there is no significant difference between each of the group. In fact, there is relatively higher repair rate in orthoscopic repair group that has been discussed in this article. Another article which compares orthoscopic versus mini open, as far as the quality of life impairment is concerned, there is no difference in subjective and objective outcome with respect to the quality of life impairment. Another article by Parcel again says that there is no statistical difference at mid-term follow-up. So again, many and more articles which show there is no difference between arthroscopic versus mini open rotator cuff repair. Whether arthroscopic repair gives fares better with respect to the early post-operative period. This is an article by Cho which show that the early post-operative outcome after arthroscopic versus mini open, there is no significant difference between these two and their equivalent clinical outcome in early post-operative period in these two techniques. Article by Lindley again say that there is no statistical difference between arthroscopic versus mini open rotator cuff repair. Another article which suggests that there is again there is no the scores are same early as far as the use of NSAIDs is considered. Whether rotator cuff repair by mini open causes stiffness. This article by Doppler, there are no cases of intractable stiffness and there are no cases of deltoid damage with the mini open or open rotator cuff repair. As far as cost is concerned, when we consider the total cost and operative room time comparison of the rotator cuff repair with the mini open versus all orthoscopic, the significantly less operative time and significantly less cost involved in a mini open than all orthoscopic repair. Another article by Kaus says that the arthroscopic rotator cuff repair have same cost as a same result, but at a higher cost compared to the mini open rotator cuff repair. Cosmesis, if you see cosmesis, both these have almost the same. So hardly any this thing, and we don't. None of my patients wear this kind of the dresses. So really, cosmesis is not a concern in our patients. So when we define a good rotator cuff repair, we need to consider anatomy and biology. So the cuff should be anatomically repaired, and there has to be good biology for that cuff to heal. So RCT repair can be good or bad, and the good repair can be arthroscopic as well as mini open, and bad repair can be arthroscopic as well as mini open. So all your aim of the treatment has to be good. Your repair has to be good whether you do arthroscopic or mini open. So you should have an anatomical repair, and you should have a good biology for that cuff to heal, and that is going to give good result rather than which technique you are using. So arthroscopic rotator cuff repair is technically demanding. It takes time. There is a significant amount of learning curve that is involved. It is instrument dependent. It makes it expensive, and there are different kind of implants that are required for arthroscopic rotator cuff repair, and that again it adds to the cost of the treatment. So my indication for mini open rotator cuff technique at this point is whenever I want to decrease the surgical anesthesia time, such as age, pure general condition, economical issues, especially in the environment which I work, patients are not that much affording, and for that reason also mini open technique fare much more better than arthroscopic. Right now I am using this technique for supraspinatus or supra plus infra, and sometimes I may include superior subscap tear in this tear as well. So the technique which was described earlier was a mid-acromial incision, but there the superior extension is really limiting, and that incision is no longer used. What is used nowadays is a horizontal incision centered over anterior margin of the acromion, um, and this is along the Langer's line, which gives better scar post-operatively. However, this is the example of that horizontal scar. However, what I use is a vertical incision that is along the anterior margin of acromion, because I can extend it proximal and distally if it is required. If you see the axillary nerve courses from posterior to anterior, and it is much more proximal posteriorly, and at anteriorly it is almost 6 centimeter distal to the tip of the acromion, and that's what incision makes it safe with respect to axillary nerve involvement. So, vertical incision has been taken along the anterior margin of the along a line that is carrying on with the anterior margin of the clavicle, that is starting from the anterior edge of the acromion around 3 to 4 centimeter down. I tend to infiltrate it with the diluted adrenaline solution for better hemostasis. Then the skin and subcutaneous tissue is split in the line of the incision, and the underlying deltoid muscle is exposed. If you see, we can have varied amount of deltoid incision. So most of the time we need to just take the vertical incision on the deltoid. If the cuff tear is very large, then we can add a small horizontal limb to that as well. So we develop a raphe between the anterior 1/3 and posterior 2/3 of the deltoid. So that's the raphe, and we tend to split this raphe like that. So this is the raphe, and then we need to split that raphe in line with the fibers. Once we split that raphe, we need to take off the anterior hooked margin of the acromion. We can put an osteotome or something like a flat instrument to protect the acromion, and just take off this anterior calcified edge of the coracoacromial ligament, which is causing extrinsic impingement onto the rotator cuff tear, causing the rotator cuff tear. So that anterior margin has to be taken off, and anything of the acromion that is anterior to the anterior margin of the clavicle can be excised safely. Once that has been done, we can take off that bursa. So that is how we take off the bursa. And once we are taken off the bursa, we expose the rotator cuff like that. So underlying rotator cuff is exposed, and then we have to identify the rotator cuff morphology. So that is what is the common appearance of rotator cuff tear. However, the same rotator cuff tear can be a reverse L shape, a T shape, or a L shape. So we need to identify these 3 points, A, B, and C. If point C can be retracted towards point A, that becomes a reverse L shear. If both can be retracted equally and brought to the distal margin, then it becomes a T tear. Or if the point A can be retracted towards point C much more better than the opposite, then it becomes a L-shaped tear. So this is very important. This identification of the cuff tear anatomy is extremely important, and that is where the mini open technique is much more better, because this becomes very easy because we get the panoramic view of the cuff tear. So if you see this cuff, it is a reverse L-shaped tear, and we can see it beautifully. So that is what is the common morphology of the cuff tear, what you are seeing. So if you see this cuff tear, we can see this a U-shaped tear. Right angle. And okay, so we can see that the U-shaped tear, and then we can retract it in different direction to find out in what way the cuff tear sits properly. So again, another example of a cuff tear morphology. So we can easily see how the cuff tear is fitting. This is the picture. So we can see that the bicep and the cuff is entire supra. Yeah. So that way the cuff morphology can be identified pretty easily. After that, we need to debride the cuff and the part of the greater tuberosity. So that is called as a tuberosity debridement, also called as the reverse subacromial decompression. So removal of the sclerotic margin of the bone, you rasp it, sometimes we do microfracture, and rounding of the GT so that the underlying marrow is exposed, and that will help you in healing. So there are various repair techniques that one can use. They can be a transosseous technique, a single root repair, or a double row repair. Now what I use a modified technique. It's a double row equivalent. It's a suture plus horizontal transosseous tunnel. So on the medial row, I put one anchor or a two anchor, and distally I develop a horizontal tunnel, which gives me a double row equivalent uh, uh, method of repair. So going step by step. So in first step, expose the cuff. After exposing the cuff, take the holding sutures and try to identify the cuff anatomy. After that, put a medial row anchor at the margin of the cartilage and take the threads out. So it can be as one anchor or a two anchor based on the cuff tear size, and it is typically double or a triple loaded anchor. After that, we tend to reduce the cuff, and after in a reduced position, we take the sutures. We take a static retrieval of the suture to the cuff based on the morphology of the cuff. Again, this is very important because by this method it scores much over the arthroscopic method, wherein it's very difficult to reduce the cuff tear and then take the stitches. Here in mini open technique, we can reduce, and at the margin where at the place where the cuff sutures are coming, we can take out the suture there so that there is no tension in the cuff at the final reconstruction. So in this way, we have the strategic retrieval of the sutures. I typically use three sutures of three different colors so that it becomes very easy to identify later. Then I cross the anterior suture to posterior. So in this way, the anterior suture have been crossed posteriorly and the posterior suture has been crossed anteriorly. So this is the way we cross the sutures so as to create a crisscross of the sutures on the footprint. And then at that point, we develop a horizontal transosseous tunnel. So the deltoid groove is a very hard bone. We can make a small drill hole there using a K-wire or a drill, and with a ethibond needle, we can develop a horizontal transosseous tunnel. Then using the ethibond needle, ethibond suture as a shuttle, we deliver this posterior suture through this tunnel anteriorly. So all these posterior suture are delivered through the anterior tunnel, and then they are tied with the fellow suture here to create a crisscross here and cause a double row repair like that, causing a footprint compression. So here we can see that we have got a good footprint repair. So in this case, we have got the sutures out and then tied with the fellow sutures so as to create this crisscross and get a good footprint compression on the natural footprint of the rotator cuff tear. And that is at the end of the procedure, hardly 3 to 4 centimeter incision, which is pretty cosmetic. So another example of a massive cuff repair, if you can see, is a massive cuff repair. That's my traction stitch, and I'm trying to see the entire tear of the supra as well as infra underlying humeral head is exposed nicely, and that is at the end of the repair with only one or two anchors, and then we can easily repair this cuff. Again, this is how it looks. This is the superior, this is the inferior. This is the medial row anchor as a single anchor, and this is the lateral row. These 2 points of the horizontal transosseous tunnel acts as the lateral row anchor, and we can get nice compression of the rotator cuff all across. And that this is the kind of result that patient can get. A very good result can be obtained, and early mobilization can be started in such a when the cuff is repaired nicely and securely. We can have other configurations. So this configuration described by Dr. Kuroda, we can use that in the same. So we can get this two vertical mattress and two horizontal sutures, and we can get different configuration as much as is possible. So as whatever configuration that is favorite of the surgeon can be used by this technique. In cases of a retracted tear, we can develop a groove into the articular cartilage. That is pretty easy. Just take a nibbler and create a groove, and we can do a single row repair and repair that the rotator cuff into that groove by medializing the cuff tear insertion. So in summary, mini open cuff repair is simple. It allows anatomic repair. It is cost effective. Deltoid splitting is not morbid, and to improve the ease of C, we need to use the arthroscopy instrument and use suture. So this small video summarizes the entire philosophy of doing it by the mini open repair.
तो वो हमेशा महंगी वाली टिकिया
लेती थी, जब वही महंगे दामों वाली क्वालिटी, वही सफेदी, बेदाग, हम ले, ये क्यों ले, वो न ले,
मान गए
किसे?
आपकी बार की लत।
Nazar or Mini-Open Super. Thank you. Thank you, friend, for listening carefully.
Okay. Good morning. Today we will be discussing about the post-operative rehabilitation after the rotator cuff repair. The rotator cuff rehab is extremely important because the timing of start and progression of the therapy should align not only with the healing of the tissue but also we have to prevent the potential strain on the involved tissue. So that the successful treatment of the rotator cuff relies on the constant communication between the surgical and the rehabilitation staff. To achieve the ultimate goal of post-operative rehabilitation after rotator cuff repair, and that goal is to relieve pain, restore range of motion, and as well as restore the prior level of function of that shoulder. So in the early phases of post-operative rehab, a sideline position with shoulder unweighted, we need to start the scapular neuromuscular education. So that when we'll be starting rotator cuff strengthening at the later stage, the sound foundation of the scapular strength is already set in. So the early passive motion, which was started recently, so that to gain a range of movement is actually is not very good, because if we start the range of motion early, there is a higher formation of the scar tissue, and that can cause stiffness and loss of motion. So a 2 weeks period of immobilization is extremely important, so that there is a development of the type 1 collagen as a natural tissue which was present before the injury status. So the during passive elevation, if it is done in scapular plane of 30 degree, it causes a zero strain on the supraspinatus. But if the same elevation is done in the sagittal plane, that will causes the higher forces on the supraspinatus. So the proper way of doing physiotherapy is very important. Similarly, if the external rotation done from 0 to 60 degree in scapular causes the least strain on the repaired supraspinatus. Another thing is the shrug sign, where there is a superior migration of the humeral head, can reduce the subacromial space and causes impingement of the healed repaired rotator cuff. So this shrug sign actually indicates insufficient scapular muscles, rotator cuff, and alter biomechanics of the glenohumeral joint. So while doing the initial physiotherapy, the proper posture, proper scapular position is extremely important. So in the early stage of physiotherapy, we should start with the scapular retraction and downward rotation, and uh, that not only improve the scapular balance but also increases the subacromial space and help promote the healing environment. So in the intermediate stage, the goals of the rehabilitations are to achieve the full range of motion while adding basics and functional strengthening to combat the immobilization and deconditioning. Overactivation of upper trapezius and underactivation of middle or lower trapezius promotes poor scapular position. So the proper strengthening of all the three scapular muscles, higher trap, middle trap, and lower trap, are very important. The high serratus anterior activation has been reported in supine punch performed at 90 and 120 degree of the position like this. This can be started in the early phase of rehabilitation. While the middle trap activity occurs with the prone rowing or prone horizontal abduction in 90 degree. This can be started in the intermediate stage of the rehabilitation. While the greatest lower trapezius activity has been shown in the full prone full can exercise or sideline external rotation. The prone external rotation 90-degree abduction shows the highest level activation of infraspinatus, while the internal rotation in same 90-degree of abduction causes the highest activation of supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and subscapular. That is all the three muscles. So, what are the challenges after rotator cuff repair and starting the physiotherapy? To make the repair successful and the rehab more difficult, these are smoking, diabetes, large massive rotator cuff tears. As per the Burkhardt et al. In 2003, the 80 to 95% improvement occurs if these three things are avoided. So the post-operative rehabilitation schedule, the phase one. Phase one usually started immediate post-operative and it starts 0 to 4 to 6 weeks post-operatively. In this phase, the patient has to wear the immobilizer. The pendulum exercises can be started. And what are the goals of the phase one? First, the patient education, control of the pain and inflammation, which is very important. Protect the repaired and healing tissue, early protected shoulder range of motion, and maintain the mobility of the joint surrounding the shoulder like elbow, wrist, and scapular stabilizers. So, what are the patient education? So, we have to make the patient aware how to use the swing. They should not attempt to lift with the operative arm like pushing, pulling, driving, and moving in the bed. Patient should not drive until surgeons allow. While sleeping, the sling should be worn, and patient can lie on one side, or if it is he is lying supine, he can use in a reclining chair or a propped up position. And a pillow can be put below the operated arm to support the shoulder. For the pain control, the icing or the cryotherapy can be started about 15-20 minutes every 1 hour when the patient is awake, and after this, the icing can be done 2 to 3 hours as needed. Pain medication has to be given at least a week or 10 days. And return to work in the early phase depends upon the type of the work the patient is doing. If the patient is doing light desk work and the dominant arm is involved, he can return to work between 3 to 6 weeks. But if the non-dominant arm is operated, he can return to work within 7 days of surgery. So, what are the exercises in the phase one, that is initial 4 to 6 weeks after the surgery? These are the neck exercises, wrist, hand range of movement, gentle elbow range of movement, and pendulum exercise. The pendulum exercise is very important, but that has to be done in forward. Let the operative arm dangle slowly so that all muscles around the shoulders are relaxed. Gently allow the arm to move by rocking body side to side, forward and back movement, and then make a small circular movement gently. Patient can also support the operative hand with the other arm while doing the exercise. Then the passive or assisted supine elevation and external rotation movement. For that, patient can either use another non-operated arm to do the supine elevation and external rotation, or the table slide in the forward bend position. Then the scapular squeeze exercises 5 to 10 seconds. He can hold it, release it, and it's 10 to 15 repetition for 3 to 4 sets. This will help in strengthening the scapular stabilizers. So in the second stage of the post-operative rehabilitation, which usually start 4 to 6 weeks after the surgery to about 12 weeks, that is 3 months. And the goal of this schedule is to start the progressive painful range of movement from passive ROM to active assisted ROM to active ROM. Improve the static and dynamic scapular control, continued protection of the repaired and healing tissue. This is very important. Let the patient do anything. We need to further protect the rotator cuff because it takes longer time to heal. Improve proprioception. Range of motion start at 4 to 6 weeks and last until 12 weeks post operatively when patient gets complete pain-free range of motion. Patient education in the second stage, patient has to he thought that he should avoid unassisted shoulder motion, that is reaching or sudden active abduction or sudden behind the back or across the body movement. This has to be avoided. Light activities such as eating, hygiene, reading, using the computer, this can be allowed. Patient can use a lightweight like cup of coffee, but he cannot use a bucket or something like that. Heat and ice. Initially, the patient can use a heating pad for 15-20 minutes before doing the exercise. That because that will loosen up the shoulder. And after the workout, he can do icing for 15 to 20 minutes. This will reduce the inflammation and relieve the pain. So return to work in the second phase is possible if the patient is doing the sedentary work without any lifting or using any heavy manual work. But the specific instruction or return to work plan for the heavier occupation patient or the laborer should be delayed. The patient can start or continue general fitness activities like walking, treadmills, stationary bikes, because this will keep the patient active and it will not stress the shoulder also. Using the sling or placing the hand on operative arm or in the pocket or jacket can be allowed because that will reduce the stress on the shoulder. So range of motion in second phase, the supine active assisted range of motion with the stick can be started. That stick can be used for the elevation as well as external rotation. Gradually progresses to the pain to range of motion from 120 to 150 degree. The progressive from the progress to full ROM and begin to work into scapular plane at 6 to 8 weeks. Supine stick, supine towel, active range of motion, supine 45-degree recline, and standing. This schedule can be started step by step. Initially supine stick, then supine with a towel, then active range of motion in supine position, then in 45-degree recline position, and then in standing. The flexion stretch on the wall or the table can be started. That will start the isometric strengthening of the cuff and the scapular muscle. Begin gentle end stage stretching at about 8 to 10 weeks. The pulley is an excellent tool, but that can be used very gently to increase the range of motion in flexion and in scapular plane. So the internal rotation can be started at about 6 to 8 weeks post-operatively. Initially, the supine internal rotation can be started with the patient lying and the arm slightly away from the body in the scapular plane, and patient can do a gentle internal rotation and then gentle external rotation. At about 8 weeks, he can begin across the body movement like a cross body adduction, bring the operative arm across the chest. Strengthening exercises in early phase, that is from 4 to 8 weeks. These are like ball on the table. Start with the elbow bend at 90 degrees. Ensure the proper scapular positioning and lean forward slightly. And then facing the table, press the ball gradually and progress to the arm outstretched and in external rotation. Hydrotherapy in the intermediate stage. Hydrotherapy can be started. The patient can move into the pool and do a gentle active assisted abduction, external rotation without any jerk. Patient should not reach for the distant object. He should perform this within the arc of his motion, and this will not only improve the range of motion but also do the isometric exercises of the cuff and the scapular muscle, further strengthening the scapular stabilizers. The scar massage of the operative sites can also be done in this stage. The manual therapy, the soft tissue scar massage can be started. The cervical neck movement and the now once you get the full passive range of motion, a late phase of strengthening can be started. That will be after 8 to 10 weeks post-operatively. Then in this stage, the side lying external rotation, the arm supported on the towel with the elbow by the side, ensure the good scapular position, perform neutral, and then progress to as rotation. Gentle wall press in the leaning position, scapular protraction, and the retraction with the resistance. This can be started about 2 months postoperatively in the third phase of rehabilitation. Then use of the TheraBand yellow, start with the yellow, progress to green and then yellow in standing position. First do the rowing. While doing the rowing movement, your scapula should be stable and the arm, the shoulder should be in downward position and not in a slugging position, and then pull gently and leave slowly. So this 10 to 15 repetition, 3-4 sets of rowing, then elbow range of motion using the TheraBand and then the triceps exercises and then external rotation and internal rotation to strengthen the subscap and intraspinatus can be started. The goal of the phase 3 are to achieve the full functional range of motion. The initial rotator cuff strengthening, improve the scapulohumeral rhythm, continued protection of the repaired and healed tissue. So what you should do to protect the rotator cuff repair as well as improve the range of motion. So patient has to avoid overhead lifting above the shoulder activities and lifting or pulling, pressing any object. Avoid quick movements like reaching to catch a falling object. The patient may begin to return to activities of daily living such as cooking, gardening, light cleaning, keeping in mind he should not reach to the far from object to avoid sudden abduction or sudden lifting a weight. The strengthening activities in the latter stage begin at about 12 weeks, that is, third 3 months post-operatively, and focus on gradually building the muscle strength and endurance. Begin about 2 to 3 sets of 10 and work up to 4 sets of 15. Begin with the light resistance band like yellow, then progress to green and blue. Registered shoulder strengthening can be started with a towel or ball supporting in 0 degree of abduction and then gradually neutral to external rotation by side or in a sitting external rotation as with weight as tolerated. Alphabet with a band or a weight in supine with the arm in 90 degree of the flexion. Add slight scapular protraction and spell 3, 4, 5 alphabets in the air and repeat 10 times. Start with the lightweight or band or resistance around the back. The foam rolling on the wall, this can strengthen the scapular muscles as well as the rotator cuff and progress in gradually increasing range of motion as tolerated. Similarly, the ball on the wall exercise can be started. This not only improve the range of motion but also improve the endurance and strengthening of the cuff and the scapular muscle. Now in the late phase of strengthening, the flexion and caption with the weight with a light dumbbell lift arm with 30 degree 45 degree flexion. Repeat the scapular plane. Resisted internal or external rotation at about 30 to 45 degree abduction. Progressive external rotation and internal rotation in abduction if the curve is strong in neutral position and patient able to maintain the good scapular control. The tennis ball or frisbee or plate with the frisbee upside down or the plate in the hand. Move the ball around the plate in circular motion without it touching the edges. Progress as tolerated. Increase the weight of the ball. Move the hand away from the body, and this will increase the strength in the healed rotator cuff. In now the last phase, that is the advanced strengthening phase, which usually started about 5 to 6 months after the surgery, and goal of this stage is specifically teach each patient depending upon their sports, work or recreational activities. the activities that patient is looking to return, whether he is returning to the contact sports or overhead sports. So depending upon that, the schedule can be specified. The weight-bearing activities with weight-bearing need to be performed with a caution as they can cause compression or aggravate the rotator cuff. When moving into weight-bearing exercises, they should be progressed very gradually. Push up on the wall, then push up on the knees, push up with the knees bending. This can be started. The patient should discuss with their surgeon as to when it is appropriate to return to the gym routine, and it should not be before 6 months post-operative. It is recommended that heavy weights are not used. The light with the more repetitions are more beneficial. It is not recommended to perform the inclined bench press. Inclined bench should be avoided for about 8 to 9 months post-operatively. There should not be military press or deep or chin-up exercises. The long-term protection of the rotator cuff. Avoid lifting in a longer lever position, that is arm extended. Avoid heavy lifting overhead. It should be avoided. Incorporate rotator cuff strengthening exercises into the regular workout regime. So exercises. What are the exercises in the last stage of the repair, that is 5 to 6 months post-operative? These are push-up on the wall, push-up on the floor. Once on the floor, ensure patient only comes at 90-degree bend of the elbow and then come up. Advanced proprioceptive ball process starts with the two hands at the chest level and progress to one hand over it. Planks can be done or push-ups with the Bosu ball. These are the further advancing exercises. The functional and sports specific drill unique to each patient and can include skills such as throwing, stick handling, or lifting mechanics. Exercises should be performed once per day with the exercise parameter focusing on developing the muscular endurance. The physiotherapist will be able to assist the patient with appropriate exercises prescription, and the surgeon will provide the guidance on timeline for return to operational and replacement activities. So, what are the inference from the schedule that rehabilitation of the rotator cuff repair must follow the criteria-based progression into taking into account healing of the repaired tissue. There should not be excessive stress on the repaired tissue, and the initial period of immobilization of 2 to 3 weeks is extremely important to prevent not only the strain on the tissue but also the formation of the scar tissue. With a firm understanding of the anatomy, healing properties, strain, and tissue loading, the program can be individualized to each patient. It is imperative for the patient to understand these guiding principles as well so that the realistic expectation can be established and desired outcome can be achieved in time. Return to sports or higher recreational activities depend upon how early patient gain the passive or active assisted range of motion, how the patient improve his strength and conditioning of the shoulder. Contact sports and the manual laborer must be informed regarding the precautions and complications. References. These are some of the references which are important in studying the effect of post-operative rehabilitation on the healing and the rotator cuff.